Hello and welcome to the Career Success Podcast. I'm Jason Connolly. In this special episode titled Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You, I'm joined by Mark Herschberg from New York City. Mark is the author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. From tracking criminals and terrorists on the dark web to creating marketplaces and new authentication systems, Mark has spent his career launching and developing new ventures at startup, Fortune 500s and in academia. Mark helped to start the Undergraduate Practice Opportunities Program, dubbed MIT's Career Success Accelerator, where he teaches annually. At MIT, he received a BS in Physics, a BS in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, and a Master's in Electrical Engineering. At Harvard Business School, Mark helped create a platform used to teach finance at prominent business schools. He also works with many non-profits, including Techie Youth and Plant a Million Corals. Mark, thanks so much for joining me on this special episode.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
So, Mark, before we kind of go into the special episode, tell us about you, because your background, it sounds absolutely fascinating.
I've certainly had a bit of diversity in my career, and I began my career, as many people do. I came out of university, and given my degrees, I started as a software developer during the dot-com era. I realized early on I want to get into management. I want to be a CTO, Chief Technology Officer. And instead of just hoping and wishing, I sat down and said, well, what is it going to take, right? To be a CTO doesn't just mean I am the best software developer. I also need to know how to be a leader, how to hire people, how to do a budget, how to work with the other departments. And all of us, when we think about these future jobs, we recognize the skills that make us successful today may not be sufficient in the future. So I set out to develop these skills. And then when I started interviewing other people and I'd ask them a technical question about accounting or marketing or whatever their discipline was, they could answer it. But then when I would ask, what do you look for in a teammate? What makes someone an effective communicator? I'd get blank stares because, of course, we never talk about this. We never teach people. So I developed my own training program within the company I was working at. And around the same time, MIT was starting to address this because we don't talk about it in the university system. So I reached out to MIT. They said, oh, yes, please come help us develop this. Then they said, please stay and help us teach this. And now I've been teaching for 20 years. So I've had these parallel paths. I still have the career where I'm building tech companies, but I also spend a lot of time helping people with their professional efficacy. And that, of course, led to the book.
Fascinating. Essential skills for success that no one taught you. I think that's the perfect way, off the back of the book, to lead on to the topic that you're here to talk to us about today.
These skills, this isn't just, well, Mark had this opinion, he had an epiphany one night. It comes from feedback that we've got at MIT and similar feedback at universities across the US of companies saying these are the skills we want to see in people, but we're not finding it. It's not being taught. And of course, this is not just for undergrads, not just for recent grads. I have seen people throughout their career who really have never learned these skills. So a classic one, let's think networking. We have all heard networking is so important. Our parents told us this, our teachers told us this, our bosses tell us this. Has anyone actually sat down and taught you how to network? The truth is, you've had more training in how to tie your shoes than how to network, even though everyone tells us it's important.
I agree with you. Well, it's the old saying, it's who you know, not what you know.
And learning how to build those relationships is so impactful in your success. We spend all this time learning our discipline and put zero time into what we know is an important critical skill. And that's what I try to address in the book and in the various classes I teach.
Why do you think, Mark, they're not people, universities aren't, starting to really wake up to this, or are they?
They are just starting to wake up to it. And of course, waking up in the university system means that's a 20-year process. And it comes from the fact that the university system itself dates back about 800, 900 years, which was based around people getting very deep into an area. In fact, if you think about our education, you have broad education when you're in high school. When you go into college, you start to focus on area, accounting or software or pre-law. You go into your graduate work, right? And then you're just learning medicine or law or chemistry. You get more and more narrow, more and more specialized as we go further. And so we focus less on these broad skills. And the people who control these programs, the professors, have gone very far. And now I work with them. And they're smart people. They really know their discipline. But all they're saying when they grant you that bachelor's or master's or PhD, you have a certain level of knowledge within this discipline. That is all they're credentialing you for. They're not saying you're going to be a competent worker. And that's, of course, what companies want.
I suppose with companies kind of waking up to this, things like LinkedIn and tools like that have been around a very long time now. It almost seems strange in a way that, people are only just waking up to this. And it's so important, when you kind of finish your degree, the first thing you need to do is be able to effectively sell yourself in order to get employment.
Exactly. And, actually LinkedIn, I think, unfortunately undermines some of this. And it is a great tool and I do recommend it. But consider adding someone on LinkedIn and saying that they're in your network. It's a little like swiping right on someone on Tinder and saying they're now your significant other.
Right. Okay. I do understand.
And people have thought, okay, I just add people. I get followers, I get connections, and therefore I have a network. But when you understand what networking is, that's not just about having a certain number of people in your Rolodex, because LinkedIn's really just a digital Rolodex, a digital address book, but rather it's about fostering relationships.
And how do you think is the best way for people how would you even teach these skills in a university?
The way we teach in the university, there it's a little more hands-on, and we do role-playing exercises, we do case studies. It's not simply lecturing, but the most important piece is having a discussion. And this is a piece I want to emphasize, because the way to learn these skills, it's different than how we've learned just about everything in the past. I learned physics as an undergrad, so I would sit there, the professor's at the board, and she's writing down equation after equation, and we're all scribbling trying to keep up with her. This is great for learning knowledge, right? For that knowledge transfer. What is a formula? What's the historical date? But when it comes to these skills, there is no formula for leadership. There's no algorithm for networking. So the way to learn it is to have a discussion. This is how we teach our undergrads at MIT. This is how every business school is teaching their students. They talk about a topic, and then you say, well, look, we have someone who's a former soldier, a former teacher, a former consultant, a former software engineer. We're going to get all these diverse perspectives. So when you want to study something like this, you want to create a peer learning group. And on my website, there's a free download on the resources section at thecareertoolkitbook.com. There's a free download, and it explains how you can set up such a learning group within your organization, whether that's your company or you set up with peers or you create some local meetup group. Now, here's the thing. You take a topic, yes, you can use my book and you can chop it up, but you don't have to use my book. You can take other books I recommend, other books that you like, wonderful podcasts like this. You just take some piece of content, say, everyone listen to that podcast episode, and now we're going to discuss it as a group. And what happens in that discussion is we say, well, yeah, this is an interesting challenge. Jason, how would you approach it? Oh, that's really interesting. I never would have thought of it that way. And so now I've expanded my understanding of leadership, of communication, of teamwork. And I might not choose to implement it that way. It might not feel natural, but even just having that understanding, that perspective, makes my own leadership stronger. So that discussion is the critical piece. Read books like mine, listen to podcasts like this, read other books. Make sure you have that discussion.
And I think you make some really good points there. I think, websites like Meetup, I've used them. I still use them. I think I've used them even more during the pandemic. So, I definitely endorse what you're saying there. Tell us more about the essential skills. You've armed us with some of the things we need to know already, Mark, but I'm keen to hear more. And I know that people listening are going to be equally keen to cram as much as we can into this half an hour.
There are 10 skills, and these, again, were identified by companies as the skills that they find very valuable. So I'm going to run through what the skills are, and then we'll talk a little about going in depth with them. The first section is on career. Chapter 1, creating a career plan. Too many people just kind of hope they wind up where they want to go. If you've ever worked on any project at work, if you've ever done any type of case for a client, you never say, yeah, let's not bother planning. Let's just see where things go. Right? You'd be fired. But we do this with our careers. We say, let's see what happens over 5 years. That's not a great plan. So There's a process for how you think about your plan, starting from what your goals are, how to figure out your goals, and then create a plan. And of course, the plan itself is never going to work exactly as you said it. We know with all plans, right? Just like anytime you take on a client, that
Sure.
it's never going to go as you think, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
So you're going to make a plan and you're going to learn how to revise it. Chapter 2, working effectively, managing your manager, understanding how you're adding value, fitting into that corporate culture, even doing with office politics. These are things we never talk about in school, but if you get them wrong, they're going to sink your career. If you get them right, it's going to accelerate it. Chapter 3, interviewing. Now, there's so much content on interviewing. We've all read blogs and podcasts on, okay, how do I interview? How do I answer these tough questions? No one teaches us how to hire. I have met countless executives, people at the top of their career. They've hired hundreds of people. They've interviewed thousands. No one ever sat them down and taught them how to do it. Some might have learned. Some may not have. And if people are our most important asset for the types of white-collar jobs I suspect many listeners have, doesn't it behoove us to get a little better at interviewing so we can attract, and find better candidates? But we
You've
don't
got
teach
to be
people how
able
to
to
do that.
sell yourself. You have to. That's absolutely key.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we don't train people. So learning how to interview, of course, as a candidate, if you understand how the hiring manager's thinking, you're more effective as a candidate. Section 2 is on leadership and management. A breakdown was the essence. What are the fundamentals of leadership and management, the fundamentals of people management and process management, because those are separate aspects, but equally important. And then in section 3, we get into core interpersonal skills, communication, networking, negotiating, and ethics.
Really interesting. I feel like I want to unpack a bit more about the ethics section, Mark.
Yeah, ethics, unfortunately, businesses all say, oh, we want ethical people, but we have zero ethical training. We never talk about it in companies, and especially in today's more complex world. We really need to look at this in 2 levels. So first is we have to have some discussions. If you think about fire drills, right now, if any of us ever heard a fire alarm, what do? We calmly walk to the stairs. Well, I hope we don't run.
I suppose it depends on the circumstances. But yes.
The few times I've heard them, we have maybe a quick pace, but certainly not running, not shoving, because as students in school, at least here in the US, we do fire drills, right? And we practice everyone be quiet, everyone walk, don't panic, don't use the elevators. We know what to do when we hear a fire alarm. We have been trained. When you hear that ethics alarm, what happens? You've had no training. So unfortunately, so many times we see little ethical violations or sometimes big ones in our companies, and people don't know how to react. And there are all these societal pressures, there are peer pressures, and there are financial pressures, and we just don't have the training to react to it. So a little bit of training, just like our fire drills, are going to make us more effective. And then in a larger perspective, we need to think about the impact of our decisions on our employees, on our shareholders, that's the one we do know how to do, on our customers, on our community, on the world at large. We sometimes don't take a moment to think about this, and it unfortunately has some negative consequences.
Right. No, I agree with you. I think you make some great points there. Tell us more about the other point. I'm really conscious that I want to get as much into this as we possibly.
So let's use negotiation as an example, as a motivational example, and then I'll give an example of the mindset changes that go on. Negotiation. Here's a topic that we all have negotiated at some point, right? We've all done, and we think of negotiations as what we do for when we take a job. So let's consider the following: you're 30 years old, and you go and negotiate a job offer, and they offer you £80,000. Okay, that's nice, but I've learned to negotiate, so I'm going to go and negotiate a little, and I'm going to go negotiate and get £81,000. That's not a heavy lift. You can imagine doing that. What happens if you sit in this job the next 30 years? That one 5-minute negotiation got you £1,000 more for 30 years. You just earned £30,000 with one single 5-minute negotiation. That's a massive return on investment.
It is.
Now, of course, you're saying, but look, no one sits in a job for 30 years, and you're right. You're not just going to have that one job and that one negotiation. You're going to get raises, you're going to get promotions, you're going to take other jobs. And probably you're going to get even more than £1,000 increase during a negotiation. If you learn to negotiate, we're not talking about becoming the world's best negotiator, but you just get a little better at it. You just learn to negotiate a little. You can be earning tens of thousands of pounds more, hundreds of thousands of pounds more over your lifetime. When you think about it that way, isn't it worth buying a book, taking a course, investing 10, 15 hours and learning to get better?
I agree. And don't you think that the art of negotiation does come down as well to having good sales skills? It's about knowing how to sell your own value, I guess.
Well, that one of the other reasons
But I'm crossing over the lessons here.
that's one of the other reasons I wrote the book as I did, because good
Yeah,
negotiators know how to communicate, right? And
sure.
good leaders know how to negotiate. These skills all build on each other. And now, of course, the negotiation example, I gave a very narrow scope of just money and just for your job. We actually negotiate much more often. Obviously, lawyers and recruiters who remarkably negotiate so often and yet tend to have zero training in it, right? That is, how is this possible when this is a key part of their job? Think about the ROI and becoming better on your job, on your bottom line. But then, of course, we negotiate with our coworkers, right? When we're trying to divvy up work, when we're trying to figure out projects, we negotiate with people all the time. So it's not always financial. And in fact, all of these skills, they are going to give you this type of ROI. Becoming a better communicator, it's not as direct as negotiating, right? When you negotiate, they say, okay, here's £1,000 more. It's very clear cause and effect. When you're a better communicator, a better leader, they don't say, oh, you're a better leader, here's £1,000 more. But what happens? You stand out, you get more opportunity, you get more success, you get more promotions. It will translate again into six figures over your lifetime. It just won't be as obvious. So all of these skills have a massive return on investment. And it doesn't mean you have to be the greatest at any of these, but spending a little effort outside of your discipline. Yes, keep up learning law, because by law, you have to continue. Keep learning in my area of technology. If I don't, the technologies will become obsolete. You have to keep developing those areas, but put a little effort into these other fundamental skills, and it will serve you well the rest of your career.
Yeah, and I think the points you make are absolutely so valid. It's things I can relate to working in the recruitment business. What I've done for the last decade is help people to sell themselves. But I think that there is so much emphasis placed on technical ability that these skills get overlooked. Whereas a lot of the time I find myself talking to lawyers who are incredibly bright and work for some of the best law firms, but they don't have great soft skills. And it's the soft skills that, I really believe as well, really get you to where you want to be in life.
Absolutely. And in the career development plan in chapter 1, we talk about not just your technical skills, and here I use it broadly, right? The hard skills, but these soft skills as well, and how you create that plan for developing it. And one of the things that happens when you start to study something like this, let's take leadership. Every company says we want leaders. Unfortunately, too many people, they look and think, okay, well, leaders are people of a certain title. I'm not going to lead until I have this title. And so they sit there and wait for their opportunity to lead. But when you recognize leadership is not positional, leadership is about standing up and saying, I have an idea. I see a future. I see a changed state. And I want to convince you that this is the direction we should go in. When you do that, you are a leader. And if you make that simple shift, if all of a sudden you say, I don't have to wait for that promotion, I can lead now day one, right out of school, a few things happen. First, you begin to lead today. You don't wait till you get that promotion. People will see you as a leader. Second, you recognize more opportunities for leadership. You don't say, well, that's not leadership because it's not in this position. And so when you find these opportunities, you get more of a chance to practice and develop the skills, making you a stronger leader. And so within each of these chapters, there is a key mental shift. This is the one for leadership. Once you get that shift, all of a sudden your development starts to accelerate. Because of course, in a single book, you're not going to become the world's greatest leader, the world's greatest negotiator, but we're going to put you on that path where you can continue to develop your skills, ideally using that peer learning group.
Yeah, and I think I think the point you make there, sort of be what you want to become in the future. And by projecting that, you're going to kind of open up yourself to a world of opportunity. The book book is so interesting, the Career Toolkit. The fact that it's covering every kind of skill that you need to kind of succeed in your career. How did you develop this book, Mark? Is it kind of a lot of it sounds like it's so many different learnings and skills that you've got to kind of mastery level at, that you've kind of condensed it all down into this book, because all these points you're making, there's so much that you could learn just about one of these skills in particular, let alone having them all kind of in one place.
I was lucky in drawing upon the decades of experience I have teaching this. It's funny when people ask me, how long did it take to write the book? I tell them, well, it just took me a few months. I said, wow, it's amazing. I said, well, look, in fairness, it really took me 20 years of teaching this, because when I went to write the book, I just said, what is it I teach? And from having done this, not just for MIT students, but I've done it at different universities. I've done it in the mentoring and managing of people at all levels throughout their careers, in some nonprofits I've worked with over the years, in just helping out friends and colleagues. I know what is the essence of these. Now, some of that comes from the theory that the professors I work with provide, especially in areas like negotiation or leadership. But then there's a practical experience. And all my experience teaching it, I know what resonates, what doesn't. I've tried out over the years. What if I explain it this way versus that way? Okay, when I explain it this way, they get, here's the next 3 questions I always get. So let's make sure I address that. So that's been helpful. This field testing over 20 years of how to present this has allowed me to take these chapters, because of course there are books on any one of these topics, but no one has time to read 10 books. So we get into, here's the essence, and here are the practical steps. This is the core. It's not the last word on it, but it's going to get you pretty far. It's going to open the door and get you down that path.
And it's a beautiful book aesthetically as well, the design of it, the layout of it. I was saying to you before we started recording this, it's a really nice book, and it looks like a great one, not just for the shelf, Mark, but to be there and be read. And I love what it says. It's a multivitamin for your career. What a beautiful analogy there. Would you say that kind of, if you had to rank the sections in importance, do you think that they're all of equal importance? Or, do you think that, some areas are more important than others that people should work on? Or is the book even structured in that way?
It's not even structured that way, because it really depends on who you are. You might be stronger in some area and you don't need as much development in that area. One of the things I note in the introduction is that you can literally jump around. You don't have to read it chapter by chapter. And yes, I do sometimes cross-reference. This is what we spoke about in chapter 4. But if you say, you know what, I want to start with negotiations, start at chapter 9. If then you want to move to working effectively, go to chapter 2. So you can jump around. The book was designed not necessarily to be read linearly. And then, of course, I also have the companion app to the book for the same reason. Now, one thing that happens when you read a book like this, you say, wow, okay, so many great tips, but you forget 3 weeks later, right? It's hard to remember. You have other books, other things in your life. So there is a free app. You can download from the website, thecareertoolkitbook.com. It's also on the Apple and Android stores, completely free. When you download this, it contains, if you went through the book with a highlighter and said, here's a good point, here's a good quote, that's what's in the app. So as you read the book, if you say, I'm reading chapter 9 on negotiations, I just want to set it to tips from chapter 9. Each day it's going to pop up. You don't even have to open the app. It's going to pop up one of those tips to help reinforce it. It's like a daily affirmation, but with advice instead of just you are a wonderful person, right? It's more concrete advice.
And I think it's such a wonderful thing that the app is free. So if people maybe want to have a go and use the app and soak up some of your wisdom, Mark, they can do that free of charge before even committing and actually buying the book. But I think the book sounds like an absolute no-brainer to anyone wanting to get ahead in their career, because all of these skills, I even have to emphasize this myself, working in recruitment, they're such important skills. And everything you've said, I totally agree with you, isn't taught. It isn't taught in university. I find this all the time with law students who come to us. They're not very good at selling themselves. We get a lot of graduates, Mark, call us up every single day, and they've got a false perception of how hard it is to find a role. They don't present themselves well. They're not prepared to phone up the agency. And you only get one chance to make a first introduction.
Exactly. And here's where they have spent so many years at university, so many years honing their skills, and many of them are probably technically very strong. They're knowledgeable about law, they're capable of doing it, but they're missing that 1% of how do I present myself? 1% of thinking, what is it the hiring manager wants? How do I show that I'm valuable to the hiring manager? And that 1% just undercuts the 99 where they're an A plus. So if you're getting a D in that 1%, doesn't matter that you're an A plus on the other 99. But when you pick that 1% up and you move up to even just a B, even just sufficient, not the world's best, suddenly that 99% that is your strength becomes utilized so much better. It stands out and you're seen for who you are.
What advice would you give to people now who are maybe, just leaving university? I appreciate buying the book is probably one good bit of advice, but there's a lot of people who listen to this show who, especially now with COVID, it's not an easy time, Mark. It is a difficult time. Yes, we're starting to come out the end of it here in the UK, but it's still an absolutely awful time. What advice would you maybe give to people to perhaps get ahead? They're at university now. They listen to this episode and they think, oh, there's so much I need to do. They could even be in their final year thinking, hang on a minute, I don't know anything about negotiation. This isn't what I've been taught. What advice would you give to young people today, Mark, who are just getting their first foot on the ladder, so to speak?
And I'll note, I knew none of this coming out of university. I stumbled for a couple years before I started to say, oh, wait, I have to start learning this. And I had to go about learning it. So you're ahead of where I was. Don't feel bad. What you want to do, the fact that you're listening to this great podcast means you are taking initiative, right? You're saying, I know there are things I need to learn. So begin by creating that reading group. Reach out to other people. You can just do your friends if you want, or do a larger group. This is going to do a couple things. One, it's going to create some accountability, right? Okay, well, I've got this meeting. I need to read that article, listen to that podcast, read that chapter, whatever. It's going to expose you to more ideas, both from the discussion or just, okay, after we read this book, what next? Someone else suggests a book you haven't heard of, right? And so it's going to expose you to more ideas. It's going to build your network. Because especially if you expand beyond just a couple friends, but to a larger group, now you're going to expand your network. And that can be really helpful when looking for a job. And especially during COVID, as we feel isolated and alone, having a group like this that meets every other week or every week, it's going to help you feel more connected. So there's all sorts of benefits from doing this. Don't do it alone. And this is true at any stage of our career.
And I think that's really, really good advice. Mark, if people want to find out more about you or about the book or, indeed, you mentioned where to find the app, where can they go to?
You can go to my website, thecareertoolkitbook.com. And from there, you can learn more about the book. It's, of course, available to buy at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, local bookstores. It's in ebook format as well. You can contact me or follow me on social media. You can download the app. There are links to the Android and iPhone stores. Or check out the resources page where I list a number of other fantastic books that go deeper into these topics, links to other sites that can help you explore these topics. And then, of course, there are the free downloads like how to set up and structure a group that's going to help you get that peer learning.
Well, there we go, Mark. That was a whistle-stop tour around essential skills for success that no one taught you. Thank you so much, Mark. It was a fascinating half an hour.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show.
That was Mark Herschberg from New York City, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. I'm Jason Connolly. This is the Career Success Podcast. Until next time, goodbye.